Chapter 3, The Golden Age, we're going to cover aviation grows and commercial aviation matures. This is also going to be a fairly quick one here, but we're going to talk about how aviation grew after you really saw through the barnstormers and how they kind of took over and really kept aviation in the United States alive, and then how it matured into commercial aviation. So as we go here, what happened now after the barnstormers, the aviation industry again started to grow a little bit, and these aircraft companies started popping up again. All these World War I surplus airplanes that had been on the market were now bought up and getting old and getting beat up and probably falling apart and crashing and things like that. So the airplanes out there weren't that much anymore. So small private airplane companies started to grow again, because now with the licensing of airplanes and licensing of pilots, there started to be a growing market for these airplanes again. And one of these airplane companies that started up, and it's one of many, but this is one that had some significance into it. And this one was a Travel Air Manufacturing Company. And this caught on right at the beginning of the growth era for right after the barnstormers in 1925, just as the Airmail Acts and the Commerce Act were really being initiated and started. And they started in Wichita, Kansas, so really heart of America, right in the middle of America they started. And what it was started by three gentlemen, Lloyd Stearman, Clyde Cessna, and Walter Beach. So these three gentlemen formed Travel Air Manufacturing Company. And what they proposed and what they were making was a small bi-wing sport plane. So very similar to a World War I looking airplane, much a little bit more rigid, more structurally sound than that. Still had the open cockpit, pilot in the back, passenger observer type of thing in the front, single engine, biplane, fixed landing gear, tail dragger. So, but it was a sport plane, and it was a plane that these pilots could get into fairly inexpensively, and it was a fairly simple flyer. So they grew this company off of their sports planes. But as these companies grew, or as this company grew, it was kind of like any other type of situation when you have multiple people in the thing or in the company. Clyde Cessna, he had the idea that a monoplane, a single wing plane, would tend to be more successful. So his thoughts were, let's go away from this bi-wing, let's go away from this two-wing airplane, and let's work on a single-wing airplane. Well, the partners in Stearman and Beach, they did not really agree with this concept. They liked the bi-wing. Bi-wing gives you supposedly more lift, and it's easier to handle, and there's less reliability on a mono-wing, their thoughts are, and stuff like that. So in 1927, Clyde Cessna left Travel Air. He sold out his shares in Travel Air and left, and he started his own company called Cessna Aircraft Company. Now, most of you have heard of Cessna. Cessna is still a popular company today, and so when he started this, he didn't venture very far from where Travel Air was. Matter of fact, he remained in Wichita. So he built his company down the road, basically, from Travel Air. So he was I'm going to make these single wing airplanes. So his first single wing design was a Cessna DC-6, and it was a single wing. You can see the single wing here, more beefier of a plane, totally enclosed airplane. You can see the windows here, single engine, fairly big back rudder area, big landing gear, tail dragger, but it was a bigger airplane and a totally enclosed airplane. So that was the first certified Cessna aircraft, and that happened in 1929. Um, so he continued to produce, and the Cessna Aircraft Company continued to produce airplanes. And in 1956 is when they came out with probably their most uh, popular type airplane. It's a Cessna 172. And if you go to any small airport today, you're going to find an airplane just like this. You're going to find many airplanes like this. A Cessna 172 is the most produced airplane in history, and it currently is still in production today. They still make this airplane today as this PowerPoint is being done. So, and you can see, again, still a high wing airplane. It has the fixed landing gear, has a single engine, totally enclosed, windows and stuff like that. And virtually these airplanes have not, these 172s have not changed much in their design other than probably getting a little more aerodynamic, a little more sleek in their design, and then updating a lot of their, the modern avionics and on board, the modern controls and things like that. So this is Cessna's, and they've got other airplanes that they also currently make also, but this one is the longest production, or the most produced airplane, not the longest production, but the most produced. There's more of these small airplanes out there than there are of any other kind. Is this one, the Cessna 172. Like I said, go up to the local small airports and you're going to find these airplanes sitting there. Then as they continue to produce airplanes and stuff like that, they're producing the single prop airplanes and things like that. And they eventually went on to making jets. Okay, so the Cessna Citation was introduced in 1969, and this was their corporate jet. You can see the jet's engines back here, and this is a multi-passenger jet. Probably not one that most people, you don't buy this because you're the pilot. You buy this because you have a company or a business, and it's a smaller company, a smaller business, and this is your jet to get from place to place and things like that. And you can get to the local smaller airports. This will still land at small airports, but it'll land at larger airports as well. But it's not a big huge 747 type of airplane or anything like that. It's a very nice corporate jet. And so Cessna started getting into that corporate jet thing in 1969. Again, these are still in production, and some variations off of the Citation are still in production today. So again, you've heard the name Cessna, and Cessna, again, is based out of Wichita, Kansas, and is in very, very much production of aircraft today. So Walter Beech, he went out and went away from Stearman also, and founded Beech Aircraft in 1932. Okay, so a few years later, he went out and founded Beech Aircraft. He also didn't venture far from where where the original manufacturer or his original company was, and they also remained in Wichita. So Beechcraft is also based in Wichita. And Walter Beech still had this bi-wing thought process in his thought process, but he wanted to go with a staggered wing design. And Beechcraft Model 17, you can see the staggered wing. What we have is the high wing is back farther, and the lower wing is more forward. Again, monoprop. This one is totally enclosed, very similar to how the Cessna became totally enclosed. Tail dragger, big back prop or rudder back here, back tail, but it's the staggered wing. It's the main difference here. Um, so so this is what kind of Walter Beech left and started forming this type of airplane. Um, since then, Beechcraft is still in production, and their most popular airplane is the Beechcraft Bonanza. Now they went back to a single wing, okay, low wing. This one has retractable landing gear. It's a single prop. It has a V tail, so instead of the straight up T tail, it has a V tail, which makes it interesting. It's a little bit different flying type of airplane because your rudder and your elevator are basically on here, on that tail section. But this is the longest production run of any airplane past or present in the world. So this one has been in constant production longer than any other airplane. Unlike the Cessna 172, which has produced the most airplanes, this has been in production the longest of any airplane. And it is still in production today, the Beechcraft Bonanza. The interesting fact now, like I said before with Cessna, is that Cessna is still in production today, and Beechcraft airplanes are still in production today. However, they are not in production under their they still produce under their own name, but they are owned both by the same parent company. So it is kind of interesting that these two gentlemen started a company together, went their separate ways, and then their companies were then bought by another company, Textron Aviation, and put back under the same company again. So both Beechcraft and Cessna are actually under the same company now today, but still produce airplanes underneath their original names, Cessna and Beechcraft. So just a kind of a interesting thing how they started together, it separated, and then now those companies have come back together again. Well, not to be left out, Lloyd Stearman, well, he went on after Beech left and said, well, I'm not going to stay with this company. I'm going to found my own. So he founded Stearman Aircraft Company in 1933. Lo and behold, he actually also remained in Wichita, Kansas. So now these three gentlemen formed this company in Wichita, Kansas, and when they all went on their separate ways, all three of their companies remained in Wichita, Kansas. It is best known for the Model 75, and this is primarily was a training plane for the Army, Air Force, and Navy throughout World War II. So this came out in the late 30s, okay, and this was the training aircraft to teach the pilots how to fly. Again, it's an open cockpit design, passenger or training pilot here, the command pilot back here. It has a slight stagger wing to it, except the high wing is forward and the lower wing is backwards. There's a single prop, tail dragger, fixed landing gear, wider body, and stuff, and things like that. And the interesting thing about this particular airplane, number 427, is this is the particular airplane that I got to actually fly into in the front passenger cockpit back in, probably it was about the late 90s. Out in Eden Prairie, they had Planes of Fame Air Museum, and they gave rides in these, and I volunteered at the Planes of Fame, and so I got to ride in the front end on these. It is quite an experience sitting in an open cockpit airplane and flying in it. And like I said, this is actually the plane that I flew in, 427. So this is a picture of that airplane that I was flying in. It was kind of cool. So and then what had happened is most of these airplanes, after the war was done and after all the training was done, became crop dusters after the war. And if you've seen like the movie Independence Day and things like that, the biplane that I can't remember the character's name in there that was flying it, but this is the type of airplane he was flying. And what they did is they sealed up the front compartment and made this the compartment that contained the fertilizers and stuff like that. And then they added um, uh, fertilizer, crop dusting spreaders in there or whatever, however they would release the material out. But this was then sealed up, and so there was only became just a single seated airplane at that point in time in crop dusting time. Um, well, at this point, Stearman did not go much farther with their production of any types of airplanes. This is, like I said, they're really one and only. They made some minor other ones, but this was their big success. Um, Not long after the war was done, Stearman Aircraft Company was purchased by Boeing. So a lot of the, and matter of fact, even a lot of these airplanes were considered Boeing Stearmans or Stearman Boeing's airplanes. So Boeing kind of enveloped Stearman into their thing, and obviously Boeing does not have a small aircraft um, um, area now. All Boeing aircraft is based into commercial aviation, so they don't do any small aircraft. So basically, the Stearman Aircraft Company is really no longer in existence, as it is now part of Boeing, and Boeing now holds all the um, patents and rights to these types of airplanes right now. So that kind of gives you those three gentlemen that started this here, and like I said, it was a significant amount because they created airplanes and then they broke off and created more airplanes out of that group. That's why this was a very significant group. Not just talking about the group, but notice we talked about Wichita, and Wichita was all these companies remained in Wichita, Kansas. This city is still became the aircraft production hub and is known as the air capital of the world, and is still known that way. Okay, and the company that bought Cessna and Beechcraft, Textron Aviation, is still based in Wichita, Kansas, along with Learjet, Airbus, and Spirit Aerosystems. All operate, design, and manufacture facilities. They're not based there, but they operate and design manufacturing facilities in Wichita, Kansas. So if you ever go to Wichita, there is a lot of small airplane facilities, manufacturing facilities, um, companies that make parts for airplanes. It's a huge area for the aviation industry in Wichita, Kansas. And just to add to that is also the home of McConnell Air Force Base and Dwight D. Eisenhower National Airport, which is the largest airport in Kansas. So there's a lot of aviation going on in Wichita area. Another company that came out, Taylor Aircraft Company, and not so much this company, but how this company eventually developed. Taylor Aircraft Company was run by G.C. Taylor, and he was an aircraft builder, and he had some good designs and stuff like that. He came into some financial problems, so he enlisted the help of William Piper, and William Piper was a wealthy oil man, so he really didn't know much about the aircraft industry. So, but he still bought Taylor Aircraft Company anyway because he was helping out with G.C. Taylor's problems in that industry. So, in 1930, he bought the Taylor Aircraft industry for $761. That doesn't seem like a lot. In today's money, that's only about $12,000 in today's money. So again, it really isn't a lot of money. But he bought an airline or airplane company for a very small amount of money. And by doing that, being as how William Piper didn't really know a ton about aviation. G.C. Taylor remained president until 1935 on that company. So he remained on for about 5 years. After he G.C. Taylor left and he went away. William Piper now became basically solely in charge of the Taylor Aircraft Company, so he changed the name of the company to Piper Aircraft Corporation. And maybe when I mentioned William Piper's name, you might have rang a bell to you as a airplane type of company. Um, and the Piper Aircraft Company had produced one real huge model, and this was the Piper J3 Cub. You will find these it's a high wing, fixed gear, prop plane, enclosed, but you'll find these a lot. You'll see these in models and the types of airplanes that like remote control airplanes and stuff like that, because these are easily reproduced. They're very easy flyer as a real plane or as a model airplane. And so it is a very popular, the J3 Cub, and it is still a very popular plane. Again, you go to small airports and you're going to see these airplanes around also, the J3 Cubs. It's a very popular airplane. It also was used in the military too. It was a very popular airplane in the military as well. Um, so as aviation continued to grow, obviously just in looking at some of these aircraft from what we saw, what we were using in barnstorming and from the Jennies, even prior to World War I and things like that, you could see how the improvements and changes were coming into effect. And like I said, a couple of the changes that were happening were like the monoplanes having one wings instead of two or three wing designed airplanes. Wing shapes. They were learning now that the shape of the wing, the size of the wing, made a huge difference in how much lift you could get or how much speed you could get. So they were now really experimenting with different shapes and designs for airplane wings. They were enclosing engines now. Before World War One, all the engines, everything, the motor was hanging out, the prop and everything like that. If you saw on some of those pictures that I had prior, you'll notice that the engines were covered up by a cowling, and these actually helped in the aerodynamics for flying. Maybe allowed the airplane to have a little bit more speed and things like that, just so that there was less resistance in there. Retractable landing gear. One of those airplanes I showed you had a landing gear that would retract. Again, if you take the landing gear, that instead of just leaving the landing gear hang underneath and you put it away and tuck it underneath the airplane and you cover it all up, there's a lot less resistance. Your plane can go faster. It's easier to maneuver and things like that with a retractable landing gear. Pressurized cabins came into being, where now planes started to fly higher and higher, where the air was thinner and thinner, and you needed to pressurize the cabin, because if you got too high and less oxygen up there, pilots would tend to pass out, and that's not a good thing when you're in control of an airplane. So they would pressurize the cabin, thus keeping the same or a very similar pressure in the cabin as if you were standing on the ground. That's why if you've ever flown before, your ears will pop and so that, because you have a pressurized cabin inside the airplane. So that was a change or an improvement to the airplane. Again, air-cooled engines. We talked about air-cooled engines in many slides ago about the air-cooled engine, but that one was air-cooled because the whole engine spun. Now we got air-cooled engines, not because the engine was spinning, but they designed better intakes for air to flow through and cool the engine and stuff like that, instead of just spinning the engine around. So air-cooled engines became highly improved. And again, everything is, as you're going like this too, is all becoming smaller and the horsepower is increasing. So you're getting more efficient engines as well. Wing flaps. So now you're having flaps on the wings that now you can adjust and we'll talk probably of wing flaps in the future here, but a flap actually makes an extension on the wing. It makes the wing longer, and it gives it a different angle. Thus, you can have a slower speed when you're flying, and still maintain your lift. A lot of times, what they do is they extend the wing flaps. Well, most airplanes will do this. They extend the wing flaps when landing because you don't want to land too fast. You only have so much runway can use, and especially the bigger airplane, the heavier airplanes you have only so much runway. So they'll extend the flap, which then allows the airplane to slow down. You can fly the airplane at a slower speed with a much bigger wing. It basically makes the wing a little bit bigger. So wing flaps were an improvement to airplanes at this point in time. Also, de-icing equipment, where they were able to add these heaters to the wing, the leading edge of the wing. So then when you're flying, again, you're getting higher, you're getting more colder temperatures, you're getting ice buildup on wings and things like that. So if you have the de-icing equipment, it'll actually not allow the ice to form, because if ice forms on a wing, it creates a different shape to the wing, thus lessening the lift and possibly taking the airplane out of the air. So de-icing equipment, again, allows airplanes to fly at higher altitudes. Flight instruments. We have now begun adding more instruments to the airplanes, where you can know your altitude and your airspeed and level flight and various different things like that. There's many different components out there, and it's come to the point where now, especially after the safety acts in the that came about, you started able to fly now with instruments. So there is a rating that you can get. Your first rating is a private pilot's license, which is VFR, which is called Visual Flight Rules. You can only fly when you have visibility up to so many miles, and you can see so many miles and stuff like that. That's VFR flight rules, and that's your first license. Then you can get what they call IFR, which is instrument flight rules, and that's when you can fly. What you do is on your or your visibility isn't so good, and you can fly just strictly by the instrument panel on your airplane. So they will actually take you, when you do your IFR flights and when you do your IFR test, they actually block the windows in the airplane, and you do all your flying, takeoff, flying, and landing, nothing but instruments, because that'll tell you exactly where you are in the air, where you are in relation to the ground, where you are in relation to the runways, and things like that. So flight instruments have now become a very important thing, and that allows airplanes to fly in weather and in very poor conditions and things like that, because they fly based on what the instruments tell them, not what they can see out the window. And two-way radios. Obviously, communication with ground and with people on the ground. Air traffic control now, what we talked about when I was showing you the flight radar thing, with the two-way radios that allow you to communicate and give you directions that, okay, we have another airplane coming over this way, so you change your heading, maybe your altitude to this. We're going to change this other airplane's heading and altitude to that, so you guys don't come within or come too close to each other and things like that. And just the communication back and forth to get weather updates and conditions and things like that at the airports and stuff, and communication between airplanes as well. And then really an all metal aircraft. Remember, World War I, all the aircraft were still basically wood and fabric and with some wire and things like that. Now we're getting into all metal aircraft. And so these aircraft are becoming more and more structurally sound because of this, and more rigid and a lot smoother in design, and but then becoming also a little bit heavier also. also. But these are some of the improvements and changes that happened throughout this time frame in um, the just after the barnstormers and after they kept the idea of flight still alive in the American people and stuff like that. Well, with all these changes and things like that, and especially like retractable landing gear, pressurized cabin, all metal airplanes, and flaps and de-icing equipment, now we're moving into the commercial aviation and how that matured and how those improvements help the commercial aviation grow and get bigger and actually become out instead of not even necessarily get bigger, but just created. Um, so modern commercial airlines really were kind of started because of the 1930 McNary Waters Act. Okay, and the McNary Waters Act was an amendment to the Airmail Act of 1925. So remember back the Airmail Act, it said the various things about carrying mail and things like this. Well, this became an amendment. They're updates to this. And basically what it said, instead of being paid for the weight of the mail, the contractors would be paid according to the available cargo space. So in the Airmail Act, you were paid for how much mail you actually carried. It weighed this much. This is how much you get paid per pound. And that's what you get paid. Okay. Now it is based on I have this much cargo space. You're paying me X amount of dollars per square foot of cargo space, and I have this many square feet. That's what you're going to pay me. So that's what this amendment is based on how much cargo space was in the airplane. And then there was also bonuses. This McNary's Water Act gave bonuses to operators flying multi-engine aircraft and equipped with those latest instruments that allowed them to fly in terrible conditions or not daylight conditions. They could fly at night. They could fly in tougher weather and things like that. And multi-engine aircraft. Multi-engine at this point is getting to be more of a for distance and for longer flights and things like that. Multi-engine would be more helpful in those things. And so basically this was an incentive for these operators to fly larger aircraft. The larger the aircraft I flew, the more cargo space I had, the more I would get paid for carrying mail. It didn't matter if I filled the cargo space. I get paid because I had the cargo space. And then I'm, now getting a bigger aircraft. It's a multi-engine aircraft. I'm equipping it with the latest technology. And you know what? If I've got all this cargo space, but I'm carrying very little airmail, well, that's a lot of empty usage or empty space in there. I'm just flying around, and I'm getting paid good, but you know what? I could probably make more money too. So what this led to is this is an attempt to provide now airlines to carry passengers as well. If I have all this space, I can add some seats to this airplane. And if I can add seats there, I can put people in those seats and I can charge people to fly and carry mail. So now I'm getting paid for carrying the mail. I'm getting paid to haul this person somewhere also. And as long as I'm going from Chicago to San Francisco and these people are going to San Francisco, why not take them? It's going to take them less time in an airplane than it will be to drive or take a train. So let's carry passengers. So this really was the beginning of commercial aviation right here because of this McNary Waters Act in 1930. United Airlines was an airline that was around that was originally, again, to carry mail. And what they said is, you know what, we're going to start thinking about this, and we're going to get that bigger airplane. We want to haul passengers. We want to do that stuff. So they're contracted with Boeing Aircraft Company. Again, remember Boeing, what they make nowadays, and they purchased Stearman a few years earlier. So they contracted with Boeing. The United States Airlines said, hey, Boeing, we need an airplane. And they came out with in 1933 the Boeing 247. If you take a look at it, it's a bigger airplane. It's well, go through here. It's a twin engine. It's got two engines here, one on this side of the nose, the other on the other side of the nose. Okay, it's an all-metal airplane. You can see that. Okay, it's a low-wing monoplane airplane. It has retractable landing gear, so the landing gear up here retracts. I don't believe this one did, but the landing gear up here retracts, so this closes up and goes in, and again makes it more streamlined. Okay, this now has a cruising speed of 189 miles per hour. Remember now, when we left World War I, we had airplanes going about 125, 130 miles an hour. So now we got this big airplane, and it's going 189 miles an hour. So we're getting some speed also in here. And the other thing is it carried, and you can kind of see here in the windows, but it carried 10 passengers and about 400 pounds of mail. And you can kind of see here the passenger seats as they would go back in here, and you can kind of see the windows. Here's 1, 2, 3. So here's the first 3 windows of the airplane. So there's a few more windows back here. And then obviously the pilot and co-pilot sat up here in this front section right here, and that's up here. Okay, again, nothing like the modern airliner today, but this was basically the start of modern airlines right here. 10 passengers, 400 pounds, pilot and co-pilot, and have beverage carts and things like they do now with the in the airlines. So, but this was the what United Airlines started, and they could carry still a lot of mail and some passengers and make some money doing it. Okay. Well, then we had Transcontinental and Western Airlines, which was also a mail carrier company, and they said, well, we need to also, as if United is doing this, we're going to also get bigger airplanes, since this McNary Waters Act happened too. We want to get in on this, and we want to make some money. So they contracted with Douglas Aircraft. Okay, and in 1933, Douglas Commercial One, or the DC-1, was a plane that they made to test and to experiment and things like that. And they worked the bugs out of this one, and eventually made in 1934 the Douglas Commercial 2, which is the DC-2. So this is the first airplane that was actually produced to sell. Okay, the DC-1 was their prototype, and the DC-2 was their first model production. And this is a picture of the DC-2 here. And you can see it does have the TWA markings on it. Again, a twin engine airplane. It was all metal. Okay. It had a low wing design. It had retractable landing gear, so you can see the landing gear is retracted up. It's not all the way up, but it's retracted up. It will extend down farther in landing. It had a cruising speed of 192 miles per hour, so it was equivalent to the Boeing 247, a couple miles faster. It, however, could carry 14 passengers and several thousand pounds of mail. And you can see in here, maybe a little bit more room than the Boeing 247, okay? A little bit wider aisles. They actually would have somebody on here helping people out, a stewardess or a flight attendant, and things like that. So this was a DC-2 that Transcontinental and Western Airlines, or TWA, contracted Douglas for. And again, carried a few more passengers, carried more mail. Well, American Airways, again, also a air mail carrier and things like that. So, well, we want also an airplane too, and we're going to contract with Douglas Aircraft. However, we don't want this DC-2 that you're giving TWA. We want something bigger. We want something better. So in 1935, Douglas came out with the DC-3, the Commercial 3. So basically in the same line of airplane as the DC-1 and DC-2, except a little bit bigger airplane. This one was a 24 passenger or 5,000 pounds of cargo. So now you can kind of see in here, you have 2 seats on a side here and 1 seat on the other side, whereas both other ones just had 1 seat on each side of an aisle. So you get more people in here, 24 passengers or 5,000 pounds of cargo. So this got to hold a lot more. It had a 1,200-mile range. Okay, so this one had that lot more distance that it could fly. It also had the retractable gear and the all-metal body and the low wing and twin engine and things like that. So it had all those features. Well, this one had so many of those features, this became the standard airliner for all airlines in the future. Okay, and in 1938, at that point, in 1938, 95% of all United States commercial traffic was done in a DC-3. So the 247 kind of went away, the DC-2 kind of went away. There were still a few here and there, but most airplanes, 95% of the airplanes in the United States that were doing commercial flights were DC-3s. And to that point, even the next year in 1939, 90% of the worldwide commercial traffic, okay, worldwide commercial airplanes were DC-3s. This became the workhorse of the commercial aviation industry in the late 30s, early 40s. This was the one. Matter of fact, this was such a good plane that up here where it says it could carry 5,000 pounds of cargo, the Army purchased 10,000 of these for cargo planes in the military, taking the seats out, and now they could carry cargo in them. Or they could carry the men in them too, and they could put soldiers in them and carry those. And these actually had the designation of C-47 in the military. So these were called the C-47s in the United States Army. So again, the DC-3 really kind of took over the commercial aviation industry in the late 30s and then into the 40s. So that's kind of how commercial aviation got its start and started to mature over time. So now in the future here, we're going to talk some other stuff about how the military did some things in this golden age between 1919 and 1939. So we're going to talk about that type of stuff in future PowerPoints and what had happened there. But now you got a kind of idea of how after the barnstormers and how the barnstormers really did save the aviation industry in the United States, and looking at what they really did in those next 15 years or so after the barnstormers were done. So with that ends this PowerPoint of golden age in commercial aviation industry.